We are back with another episode of the MMA Prospectus, not the triple slash line. I've given up on that dream for the last time, finally. You'll never hear those words again out of my mouth, ever. That's it. Had to
Oh,
get it out one last time. But I'm joined by Patrick Wyman of SureDog.com and TP Grant of Bloody Elbow for this round. Grant, you escaped the sex dungeon. How did that go?
oh, it was fun.
Good.
The sex dungeon or the escape,
Yeah.
or both. Both I suppose are valid answers.
Yeah. It's all is fair in love and war.
I don't know if I'd call that love, but it's
Tough
Hey,
love.
hey,
Tough
to
love.
each their own.
That's right. And Wyman, you're back again. And I want to jump right into the big thing we wanted to look at first was UFC 179. You had some guys that you were really looking forward to watching on that show. How did they fare? Mostly your boy Benil Dariush. You got to start there, right?
yeah. I mean, I was like that was so Dariush took a clear decision from Carlos Diego Ferreira, and that was pretty much exactly how I expected that fight to go. It's the difference between two guys who are at relatively similar stages of development, one of whom has really good coaches and is a smart, cerebral dude who tends to fight that way, and the other guy who may have better physical tools and may actually have deeper skill sets, but doesn't have the wherewithal to put them all together. I mean, we see pretty much exactly this fight happen at least a few times a year, and yeah, I mean, I wasn't surprised by it. That was pretty much exactly how I thought the fight would go. I thought Benny looked good. His wrestling looked good. His top game is obviously pretty damn good. To be able to completely shut down the guard game of a third degree black belt with pretty legit grappling chops. Yeah, I mean, I thought he did well.
Anyone else?
I mean, from that perspective, it was an impressive performance. Sorry, I thought you were asking for anyone else to jump in, not
No,
anyone else.
I figured we'd each give our take, but no, Tom, go
Oh,
after.
it was an impressive performance from that perspective. It was also just a brutal fight to watch. Um, it's Darius is gonna. I think he's going to have to. He's gonna linger in that mid card undercard range for a little bit, I think, and I think that actually might be to his benefit in the sense of having a really mediocre fight in the sense of watchability. It's not going to cause the UFC to fire him up the ladder too quickly. So I think in that case, he actually did himself a favor by having a god awful fight to watch.
I mean, it was not the worst fight of the main card. If we want to move this along to talking about another prospect, Lucas Martins, like that was the worst fight to watch on the main card. That was terrible. I
Yeah,
was
that was bad.
just
That,
like one of the worst fights of the year.
yeah, I feel like Lucas Martins maybe didn't get the memo about how having your back against the cage is bad.
Well, I mean, his coaches were continually giving him the memo in Portuguese throughout the fight, and he still somehow didn't receive it. Maybe I don't know. Maybe there was a weather issue. He wasn't receiving transmissions. I can't speak to the reasoning there,
Okay,
but
well, Lucas Martins and his shitty performance aside, let's talk about Gilbert Burns at least a little bit. That's obviously the shining star of the UFC 179 prospect roster, right?
um, yeah. Well, I mean, Burns is everything he was touted to be and more. I mean, I think that's the best way to put it. He is every bit the athlete we were told that he is. He's every bit the submission specialist we were told that he is. I mean, he's a way better striker and wrestler than we had any legitimate right to expect him to be. But like this is what happens when you take a fantastic athlete with a fantastic base in one of MMA's component skills, and you put him at a camp where they can teach him those other things. Like there's a reason that he looks really awesome, and we'll get to this when we're breaking down your welterweight list and we get to the top spot. But this is what big camps do. They churn out really, really, really good fighters with really great athletic gifts, and when you can offer all of that under one roof, things are going to come together. I mean, and we could say something similar about Andre Fili for that matter too.
Yeah, I was actually pretty impressed with Andre Fili's. his striking's come a long way. I mean, he actually really pretty much dominated Felipe Arantes on the feet in that fight. It was pretty one-sided. I mean, we're not saying he didn't get hit at all, but if you looked at just the striking stats alone, he pretty handily outworked him.
Yeah. And I mean, it's got to be a little bit of a concern that Fili trains with the caliber of wrestlers that he does, and he was still taken down without too much difficulty by a guy without any wrestling, by a guy who doesn't have any wrestling background. But I mean, that's the kind of thing where I don't think he expected Arantes to shoot takedowns on him, and that's probably why he defended them as poorly as he did. I think he went in there expecting an almost pure striking match, which he would have been fine with giving Arantes, and then when Arantes comes out with a wrinkle in his game, which if he had done his homework, maybe he should have expected, because Arantes has done that before. It wouldn't be the first time he shot a takedown. But I mean, those are all things to go back and look at in Fili's camp. I don't think. I mean, it was a really good performance against a dangerous guy. He was able to do enough to get a clear decision from judges in a place where that hasn't always been easy to do.
Yeah.
I personally, I liked Fili's striking quite a bit. I was a little underwhelmed with his technical grappling on the ground. I felt basically his grappling on the ground was pretty much summed up as explode and then try to escape. Mm-hmm. And if that didn't work, he didn't really seem to have much of an answer except to wait for another chance to explode. So I think he's going to have to answer that, because his wrestling was a bit of a concern. And then once on the ground, he didn't look super comfortable. But his striking looks pretty excellent at this point. Gilbert Burns continues to impress me. We will be talking about the Blackzilians later on. And I'm not sure if I'm misremembering, but I only remember Burns winning 2 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championships, and the UFC keeps pumping him as a 4-time world champion. I might be missing one, so if there are any BJJ nerds out there listening, send me a message and let me know what I'm
talking about. Some no-gi stuff or stuff like that.
I have one of his no-gi ones. He's won a world championship in the gi and out of the gi, and then they might be counting like a World Cup, a Pro World Cup win that he had, but that still only adds up to 3. Maybe they're counting like one he had a blue belt or something that I'm forgetting.
Yeah.
But he looks fantastic in all phases. Obviously, he's dangerous to finish on the ground, but I was pretty impressed by his wrestling and how he's coming along as kind of a forward-moving striker, which is, as Pat talked about on Heavy Hands the other day, always a good skill to have for a grappler. It fits nicely into that want to close distance, that forward-moving striking, that pressure fighting sort of style. So it's good to see him developing a functional striking game that fits into his strengths.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, so I guess the last thing, we could get to Christos Giagos, but I really honestly just think he got a matchup in over his head. There's not a lot to be taken from that, positive or negative. But the only other person I really want to touch on at all is William Macario. And do you guys think that there's any chance, like, is there something that he can fix quickly, or is he in a place that he needs to change a lot about his game?
I don't think there's anything wrong with his game. I think there's something. I think there's something wrong with his preparation. I don't think that he's going to reach whatever his. I mean, probably fairly substantial peak. I don't think he's ever going to reach that training at a small camp with the coaches that he's had his entire career. I think this is something that will continue to harp on, as not just today, but over the course of the entire time we're doing this podcast. There are things that you get at bigger camps that you just are not going to get at smaller camps. And, if you're later into your career and you've got the resources to put together a camp that's really focused on you, that can work out. That's worked out for, that's worked out for Michael Bisping. That's worked out sometimes for Rampage Jackson. That's not the worst thing. But when you're a young guy starting out, you need to be around other high-level professionals. You need to be around professional coaches who can fill the gaps in your skill sets, who can teach you fundamentals. You need to be around other established pros who can show you how to be a pro yourself, who can show you, what you need to do in terms of strength and conditioning and nutrition, and we're going to hook you up with, and we're going to help hook you up with sponsors, and it's stuff like that you just are not going to get that you're just not going to get at a camp like Macario's at right now. And that's what I think that's what he needs to push himself to the next level.
Yeah, I think Macario showed that he can hang with fighters the level of Magny, who is a much better fighter than I think we knew even 6 months ago. I thought Macario was actually getting the upper hand at times in this fight, and it just kind of went to pieces for him. And I would agree with Pat that he needs to get into a more professional environment. I mean, his skills are fine. Those Brazilian skills they were pumping up are just fine. I think it's more of a headspace and more of a preparation, and generally like how he approaches his game going into a fight.
Yeah,
Because he had aspects. I'm sorry, he had aspects of his game that were working. He just couldn't put it all together.
I see. I gotta say, personally, I think it's a skill thing, and I don't think that as a guy who really, when he's standing, basically is just a boxer, can consistently win at a high level in the UFC. I don't think that. I think that anytime he faces somebody who strikes well from range and at a distance, he's going to end up losing. He's going to end up not losing every fight, but he's going to end up in a lot of very close, bad fights that take advantage of the fact that he really is limits himself a lot when he strikes.
I mean, I think you're doing a bit of a disservice to the overall realm of Macario's skills, because he's got better wrestling than we would expect from a random dude on the Brazilian scene, and he works some top control, and he'll throw a low kick every now and again. I don't think
every now and again, but we're talking like one around, two around. I mean, and when I say, I'm not saying like all he does is box in every fight. Yeah, he does wrestle to some degree as well. But what I'm saying, when somebody's facing him and striking against him, they basically know that he's only going to throw punches at them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily a handicap. I think that if you build your game around working your way into punching range, and I think this is where better coaching would help him. I think he needs to be better about working his way into the distance where he's most effective. Does that make sense? Like,
it does, but I'm of the opinion that you put yourself at such like that you can put yourself at such a disadvantage having to do that all the time that you end up in a lot of trouble in fights. I mean, I think of Mike Richmond versus Frodo Kospolaev is like my prototypical example of this, where Richmond is a better boxer, certainly a better striker in any one phase than Kospolaev is.
Yeah, I mean, but I think there's a larger strategic dimension to that, right? And my thought is, if Macario were better at pushing his opponents towards the fence, where that range thing becomes less of a factor, then I think his overall game would be more effective. And that's what allows look at Junior Dos Santos. Rarely throws kicks, but is certainly one of the best strikers in that division. But the reason that works for him is because of his in and out movement, and because when he wants to unload, he's going to push you towards the fence, where any kicking game is less of a problem. I mean.
Yeah, but you're also talking about heavyweight at that point, at which point all statistics become incredibly skewed.
Okay, well, what about Chris Weidman then? I mean,
yes.
Yeah, I mean, Chris. Those are both guys who are prototypical pressure fighters, and I think a boxing game works well for a pressure fighter. The problem is that Macario doesn't have any sense of where he wants to fight in the cage, and so. Yeah, when you're standing out in the middle of the cage and your opponent has all the room in the world to move around, then yeah, a lack of a kicking game is going to be a real problem. If you have a real defined sense, what you want to do is pressure a guy and push him towards the cage, then a boxing heavy game with limited kicks works just fine and may actually work to your advantage.
Okay, I would argue that Chris Weidman kicks more than William Macario, but that's.
Not when he was Anderson Silva twice, he really wasn't.
Well, yeah, but those fights were both incredibly short. I mean,
we got 18 minutes of film out of them, 15 to 18 minutes. I mean, that's not a tiny sample.
No, but I mean, but okay, but the Machida fight, like, I mean, he does work his kick. He works some kicking game that's enough to like keep guys honest. I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and I would agree with you in that you can't just give away a whole range to your opponent. Like even Michael Bisping, who is as close to who at least for most of his career has largely been a boxer, doesn't just give away kicking range. He's either inside or he'll throw the occasional low kick to not just see it to you. Alexander Gustafsson, same thing.
Yeah. And Nick Diaz get guys against the fence, establish his range, and then just start unloading.
Yeah, and I mean, there's an argument to be made that Nick Diaz doesn't find consistent success against top competition.
Well, I think as the grappler here, who with not a ton of striking experience, I think I could sum this up as Zane is arguing that his skill set doesn't match his approach. His approach to fighting is one of a guy who would need more kicks into his game. He doesn't fight to match his skill set. He fights the way that pretty much everyone else fights, and he doesn't have the skill set to fight that way. He would need to build a game around what he does, but he hasn't.
Yeah, that's not quite what I'm saying, but I'm not gonna beat this horse in the face of overwhelming opposition. And we've got other shit to move on to, so we really can't spend this much time on why Macario lost. The point is, the bloom is off the rose, and we should move on to covering our welterweight scouting report, because that's the real important thing here.
Before the shine's off that, right?
Yeah. So Tom, the scouting report, taking it over, that was your proposition. How do you feel about it now that the first division is up?
I'm enjoying the heck out of it. I've always been kind of prospect obsessed. Back when I was a really hardcore baseball fan, I would buy the Baseball America books of baseball prospects, and I would used to follow the NFL draft and all that stuff. And God, back when I was at Bleacher Report, I put out a god awful top 25 prospects in MMA, and I came up with my own horrific definition of prospect. And now, with some time between now and then, and having seen Pat do it extraordinarily well, I wanted to take another crack at it. And being able to work with Zane, who's an obsessive tape study, and just by sheer I'm not sure if it's OCD, but need to watch film, really makes it a lot easier for me, because he tackles you tackled more than half of the 70 fighters before I got to 15 of them. And we flagged the ones that we should both watch, and then we both kind of went over them. So I think we have a good process down, and I think I'm gearing up to hit that light heavyweight list that we put together. And so I'm really excited to talk about this welterweight list, because I think we got some good guys, and there were a lot of good guys we didn't even get to put on the list. That's the big thing. Is I think one of the mistakes that people make is that if we didn't put them on the top 10, we think they're garbage. But there are a lot of good guys out there that didn't make this list, which is why Zane's putting together that extra piece there, because I mean, we have I've got 5 guys I want to talk about before we even get to the list.
I mean, I want to start off by saying I'm extraordinarily impressed with what you guys did. I mean, you guys reached really, really, really deep into what was out there, and you guys came up with a fantastic list. I love your process. I think the fact that both of you were watching and you're both bringing your insights to it, I think is really, really. I mean, you guys did an awesome job. I mean, I have a couple of quibbles, but for the most part, no. I mean, I think you guys did an awesome job. You highlighted a lot of really, really good fighters, and I think the fact that you guys found additional prospects who are good and who at any given point are good picks to end up on a top prospect list. I think it speaks to both the depth of the division and how deep you guys went in terms of looking for prospects. I want to start saying how impressed I am and just keeping lavish praise on you.
Okay, well then, who did we miss? What's the one guy that you looked at and you thought, why isn't he on the list?
Before you say that, are we ready for Zane to rage quit?
No, I'll kick him off. I have that power. I don't have to quit here.
No, I mean the one guy that I think deserves to be on a list is Dalby, and the reason that I say that is, and I recognize the symptoms because I've been where you guys have been in terms of putting together lists, and I think it's really easy when you're doing a prospect list to overlook the obvious guy, and I feel like to a certain extent that's what you guys did here. Like I don't think it's possible to make a real legitimate argument that Yaroslav Amosov is a better prospect than Nicholas Dalby. He's not. I mean, Yaroslav Amosov, I'm gonna be real honest with you. That guy, he's got awesome athletic gifts, and he's won some good fights. But like, there is no reason to think that dude is going to develop into a legit guy. But that's my only quibble. Otherwise, that's it. I mean, you look at Dalby, and maybe he's not going to be like a top 5 type fighter, and I don't think he will be. But I think the flip side to that is that he's really steady. He's solid. He's a good athlete. He doesn't have any holes in his skill sets. His skill sets may not all go deep, but they're not. But he doesn't have there's just this whole thing that he has no idea how to do. And I think that's a really underrated thing when you're looking at prospects. He's beaten legitimate competition in big organizations in front of sizable crowds. He has consistently gotten better from fight to fight, which is not something you can say for everybody. And I mean, I think those are all things in the grand scheme of looking at prospects that really matter and are good signs when you're trying to project future success.
So if I can take this one first, Zane, to respond why Dalby didn't make our list. Dalby was the first fighter that I looked at, being the one that immediately came up when we started looking at welterweight prospects. And I mean, potentially I had an issue of raised expectations, but when I went through and watched his fight library, I came away kind of wondering why he was so high on everyone's lists. And I ended up kind of feeling that he was kind of like I feel like the role he would fall into. I do think he's going to be in the UFC. I think he's probably the most UFC-ready fighter of anyone I looked at. I'm kind of wondering why he isn't already in the UFC. But I kind of feel that his ceiling is kind of like middle to high middle gatekeeper for that welterweight division in kind of like a role that Darren Cruikshanks is holding down. I feel like strong wrestlers and ground fighters are going to give him fits his whole career. And I feel like his single biggest strength is his striking, which is pretty obvious. But I never really saw a lot of combinations from him. I saw a lot of pecking from the outside, single shots, maybe 2 shots, and then kind of that very karate style, like back out and then come back in for 1 or 2 shots. And it's all about kicks, which are very good. I mean, let me get straight. He's a good fighter. I just didn't see enough in the surrounding skills around his striking to make me think that he's going to be able to succeed when he starts hitting that like top 15 level guy. On top of the fact that he's already pushing 30, and that I want to see that breakthrough fight for a guy at that age. To make me start like believing that they're going to make that next step. Dalby was pretty much my first guy out of my rankings. When I put together my rankings, he was kind of my first dude that I kind of chopped out of it because I kind of saw that lower ceiling, but I guess he's the more sure thing, if that makes sense. He's a sure thing, but I don't think he's going to go as high as some of the guys we put on there have the potential to.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all totally fair. But the flip side to that is he may not have the world's highest ceiling, but he is a safe bet. And there's something to be said for a guy who's a safe bet, especially when like the things that you're talking about in terms of not throwing a ton of combinations. I mean, I would disagree with that. I think he throws some pretty solid punch kick combinations. He's really good at catching guys as they're moving backwards. I mean, the guys he reminds me of are Tarek Safadine and Martin Kampmann. I think his game is really, really similar to both of those guys in slightly different ways. I think he captures the kind of underrated clinch game that Martin Kampman has. I think the way that he throws kicks and the volume with which he throws kicks and the way that he moves around and takes angles into those kicks reminds me of Safadine. He doesn't have I would agree with you to the extent that no, he's not going to be a top 5 fighter. But we're talking about a division that has how many guys signed to it, Zane?
96, 97.
There are 96 guys. There are 96 guys in the UFC. Being a top 10 or being a top 15 or top 20 welterweight in the UFC, that's really, really, really good. And the fact that he could, there are a lot of guys who are ranked in the top 30 of that division that I would pick him to have competitive fights with right now. And I think he's still probably got 4 or 5 years, especially because he doesn't take a lot of damage. I think he's still probably got 4 or 5 years to develop. So that would be my point on Dalby. But again, I think you can have an honest difference of opinion about a guy like that. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with having guys that you're higher on or not higher on. I mean, you look at NFL and NBA and baseball scouts have massive disagreements about these kinds of things. Like there were scouts who came back with first round grades on Tim Tebow, and there were scouts that came back with grades that said this dude is not drafted. So and it's not just big name guys either. There are always head scratching moves in the NBA draft or head scratching moves in the NFL draft, and that's just because you really can look at the same things and come away with much different takeaways. I think that's fine. I don't think it's not like there's a right answer here, especially because we don't have crystal balls and we can't see into the future.
No, definitely. And yeah, I guess for me in some ways, the biggest, I'm very much, when I scout, I'm a safety last sort of person. Like the safety outlet is, can they do they have a wrestling game they're working on for me? 'Cause the thing I want to see is how athletic is this person? Do they do things when I'm watching them where I'm like, holy shit, how did he do that? The very bottom guy on our list, Anatoly Tokov, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There's a moment in his fight with who was his last bout against? It was American guy.
Jordan Smith.
Jordan Smith. And it's early in the first round where he basically just teleports to Smith's back.
Mm-hmm.
He just is suddenly on his back, and then they roll out of the cage or something and have to reset. And there was an earlier bout where he hits a full pro wrestling suplex on some guy. He has head control, and he just grabs him by the arm and just does a suplex. And it's just
it was a front headlock throw, if memory serves, if I'm thinking of the same fight.
Yeah, probably. And it's just holy, that, and that's the kind of raw baseline I'm looking for when I'm watching these guys, because otherwise he's totally raw in a lot of areas still, and a little ways into his career. But he still does these things athletically where I'm just that's so obviously head and shoulders above what I would expect when I'm watching, a fight.
Yeah, one guy that really jumped off the screen for me that we didn't end up putting up on there for a couple good reasons was Will Galvao of Nova União, who I think we sent a video over him to Pat, and it was one of the only Brazilians we actually found at welterweight, and holy smokes, is this guy athletic, and just he gave you those amazing moments. Unfortunately, he only has 4 fights, and it doesn't seem that anyone actually knows how old he is, including Will Galvao. When the fights we looked at, they literally had in his fight stats on the video his weight, his height, and then age, NA, not available. So we ended up leaving off because he only has 5 fights in his career, and we have no idea how old he is. But he's one of those guys, who knows what he could turn into, because he's athletic, he's aggressive, and he's got that kind of classic Nova União style. And it hurt me a little bit to leave him off the list, but I think it was the right call just because of those kind of X factors. We really haven't seen him outside the Brazilian circuit and against strong wrestlers, so we don't know if he's got a true Nova União wrestling game, or if he's just able to stop the local Brazilian guys' takedowns.
Yeah, in Galvao's case, when you see somebody with a Nova União thing next to their name on Sherdog, you don't know whether that person is actually training, at like Academia Uper, or if he's just at one of the bajillion Nova União branches.
Oh, we know. Actually, he's got an Instagram account that's pretty active. He's like taking selfies with Hanan Barrow and all that kind of thing.
Okay, so in his case, you know that, but with a lot of guys who have that Nova União splash next to their name, like you don't even really know whether that's the case or not.
Pat, I think the answer is you need to get on Zane's Instagram level.
Believe me, I've got the prospect Instagram game down. I mean, there are plenty of unknowing Brazilian and Russian prospects who have no idea how deep I am into their personal lives. So take that as you will. But yeah, I mean, my thing with guys like Tokov and Amasov and with some of the other guys you have on your list, and I think this is just kind of a difference in our approaches. And again, there's nothing wrong with this. You look at a guy like Tokov, and he lives in the middle of Siberia. Like he lives in Tyumen Oblast, which is ironically the richest city in Russia because of its mineral resources. But like he doesn't, he's not training with high-level dudes all the time, and so the development that you're looking for, despite the fact that he has these skills and he has these incredible physical tools, it's like he may develop, but he's not a safe bet too. And that's where, like, I think that's the fundamental point of difference in terms of our approaches. And again, want to emphasize there's nothing wrong with having different approaches like this. I would hold off on a guy like that until either he moved to a bigger camp or he got more experience or he beat like a really big name.
Well, this is one of the fundamental differences between doing a list of 25 and a list of 10 for every division, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have more room to focus on guys like that.
Yeah, and when you're doing a list of 25 and you're looking for guys that are going to be future champ, you hope that every guy looks like Kamaru Usman. Like, that's what you're looking for. Are you looking for the guys who came out of a great background, are working with a great camp, and are developing a good record and jump off the page athletically?
Well, the guys we were looking at, Zane, Usman was with Black Zillions.
Yeah.
Galvao was with Nova União, and then it was just a mess of guys from camps that I've never heard of, or camps that I'm tangentially aware of now because I watched a ton of regional Russian MMA, and you'd see a bunch of guys from like Sochi Fight Star or like Russian Top Team or
Legion Fight is another. Legion Fight in Rostov is another one, or ACB Berkut, or those kinds of Russian camps. Some of them are turning out a lot of good fighters, and others of them you have no idea whether it might just be like a heavy bag in some cave in Dagestan. Yeah, that's an actual thing. I have actually seen that.
I don't doubt it. But I mean, I think that's just the goal has to be different when you're producing a bigger list. It can't be because honestly, like we know with the big camps, their top talent, it's all already in the UFC. Like some guy is 10 fights into his career in a top camp, he's in the UFC.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, like, I look at a dude, and I'm sure you'll get to him when you're looking at bantamweight. But like Cody Garbrandt is an alpha male dude, and he's a friend of Lance Palmer's from Ohio. But like, Cody Garbrandt is 5-0, and he's beaten pretty legit prospects around his level. Cody Garbrandt is not going to make it to 10 fights before he gets to the UFC. He's got maybe 1 or 2 more fights before he gets signed.
Yeah, and that's partially too why we ended up. I mean, we just ended up with a lot of guys that aren't at top camps. Because when you're looking for top prospects, if you're really like, you can't scout somebody at 3-0.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things. Because someone, it was a troll comment and it was completely throwaway. But if the idea that like why we have so many international fighters and no Americans, the top Americans, the good Americans, get signed really fast. The UFC will take flyers on guys and throw them on undercards of Fight Pass cards really quickly. Bellator will throw guys on cards pretty quickly. The prospects that develop outside of the UFC at this point, for the most part, are happening over in Europe. Even the Brazilians are getting swooped up pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So a lot of our guys that we look up end up being from Europe because that's where guys are getting to get over 10 fights without drawing attention from Bellator or the UFC, or drawing attention but not getting signed.
Yeah, I mean, look at Colby Covington, American top team guy, wrestled at Oregon State. He was an All-American. Colby Covington got picked up at 5-0 with 0 fights against guys with winning records.
Yeah.
Chris Etherly got picked up by Bellator at 4-0. What are some other recent
Brandon
examples?
Thatch. I mean, Brandon Thatch actually stuck around for a reasonably long time, but still, it was 9-1 when he got picked up.
Andre Feely, same deal. Feely got picked up relatively late by American prospect standards. We could go on and on. Bubba Jenkins, Darian Caldwell. I mean, the list is frankly almost endless. It's rare. I mean, even you look at like Michinori Tanaka only had like 2.5 years. Japanese prospect had like 2.5 years of professional experience when he got picked up for a card.
Yeah.
Like, because of the demands of the UFC schedule, they're picking up guys quicker and quicker and quicker, and those guys are getting picked up even more quickly in North America or other countries where it's really easy to get a late notice work visa for a short notice fight.
Yeah, I mean, Brazil is basically as much of a dead zone as the U.S. at this point, from what I can see. Like, scouting talent in Brazil has become really difficult. Really difficult.
Yeah, I mean, and partially too, when you're looking at top Brazilian prospects these days, guys who are coming out of the big camps, who are coming out of Nova União, or coming out of Team Nogueira, Pitbull Brothers, I mean, even X-Gym to a certain extent, like, guys on the Brazilian scene don't want to fight them. So you end up with these guys who are 4-0 or 5-0, and they fought nobodies because guys keep pulling out of fights with them once they figure out who they are and what their team is. And so even that, yeah, I mean, it's a similar circumstance. They're getting picked up really early. Like Warley Alves, who won the last season of the Ultimate Fighter in Brazil. Like Warley Alves was 6-0 and had fought, I think, one guy with a winning record when he got picked up for Tough Brazil, and he'd been fighting for like a year and a half.
Yeah, well, and Zane, you pointed this out when we were talking about Davy Ramos last week when he was leading into his fight with Bellator, which he went to Mexico to get his early fights out of the way and got some pretty like not completely easy competition, but beatable competition with getting to avoid all the top camps in Brazil while still being notable to the U.S. promotions and got signed into Bellator and I still haven't actually looked up what actually happened to that bout.
He lost.
He lost.
He was fighting, what's his name? Caveman Dave.
Yeah, Caveman Davis. Yeah.
It's a terrible matchup for a athletic but somewhat wild brawler grappler.
Yeah. So I'm gonna say we're cruising through our time here if we want to get back onto the list. We've covered number 10.
Well, no, I don't know about I mean, we could go through them all by one at a time. Yeah, I guess.
Do you want to defend your boy, number 9?
Pick through it, but we talked about Tokov a little. We've talked about Amosov a little. So number 7 or number 8 was Piraev. So that was a top guy for you, right?
I actually had him at number 8 on my whole list.
Yeah.
I think if I could go back in time, I probably would have knocked Piraev down into the teens or 20s, because when I was scouting Piraev, he had just beat Benjamin Brinsa, and that was before we knew that Brinsa was maybe not all that he was cracked up to be as a prospect. And so I think there was that kind of bias going on in my analysis. Also, with Piraev, I grant you, he's very crafty, he's very skilled. I like his game a lot, and I really think he could end up being very good. The problem for me is we're just never going to know how good he actually is until he drops to lightweight. I mean, he is a comically undersized welterweight.
Yeah,
he's like one of the smallest welterweights I've ever seen.
I feel kind of he's comparable to Gegard Mousasi when Gegard Mousasi was fighting at light heavyweight. Maybe not quite on that level, but like a lesser version of it where he's not quite the athlete. He's not big enough to compete with these guys, but he uses craftiness and pretty darn clean technique to overachieve. And I think Zane and I both pegged him as a likely guy to overachieve in his career and perform over his athletic abilities and above his size. And if he moves to lightweight, I think he would definitely be more of a player. But I think he could be a player even at lightweight just based on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think with him, if he can get to if he can get to a better team and he can cut the weight, I mean, because honestly, looking at his frame, he may not even be a lightweight. He may actually be a featherweight. I think he would be he'd be a big but not like extraordinarily large featherweight in the UFC.
Yeah.
And like and I feel similarly about him as I did about Rashid Magomedov when Magomedov was coming out. Like, even Magomedov is not a big lightweight. Magomedov might be, by the UFC standards, a natural featherweight. And I think it's hard. I don't like seeing a dude on the regional scene eat some of the shots that Parayev has eaten from some of the guys he's fought, almost purely due to his size. Where he gets in on the hips and is in the process of hitting a beautiful throw, and he just gets slammed to the ground. That happened to him a couple of times.
We can't keep spending like half an hour on everyone. So, Pat, I got to get the wrap it up box for you.
I'll wrap you, Zane. I'll wrap you.
All right. So Sebastian Kadastam. Any thoughts? Anybody? Yeah. Was Kadastam a guy that you looked at all before, Pat?
Yeah, he had when I was looking at him. Let me check this real quick. He had not fought all that much. I think he's had what, two? I think he's had two fights in the last.
He's a pretty outstanding athlete. Good. I like his kickboxing game. It's kind of that Northern European Thai boxer game. Good hands, heavy leg kicks, and his I feel his wrestling game is mostly athleticism at this point. But I think he's got time to clean it up a little bit, and I like at this point. I think it's easy to like tough athletic strikers, but I think he's a cut above your like average tough athletic striker, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the reason that I left Kadastam off my list, because I did look at his tape, was because there wasn't a lot of tape on him, and what there was, the fights were over so quick that you didn't get a really good sense for the full breadth and depth of his game. But having that 5-round decision on there, you get a sense that really he can go fairly deep, and he does have cardio. And so if I were looking at him again, I would probably rate him substantially higher. But I like him a lot. There are a lot of things he does well. He's a really good athlete, pretty good output. He's a very savvy striker. He knows how to work around somebody's guard. He knows how to work head, body, legs in the same combination. There's a lot to like about his game. He's very good.
Yeah. Vartanian, obviously that's somebody that you wouldn't shut up about before we did this. It was always, this is going to be the most legit guy on your list, Edward Vartanian. Tom, you were going to throw him off the list, weren't you? If I remember correctly.
Let me look. I don't remember that.
I believe this was your revisionist, where you were like, and I went and watched him, and then you were like, oh, okay, wait, never mind.
I think I may have watched like one fight, and it was a god awful fight of his, and I just wrote him off almost completely. Yeah, I'm looking at him. I think no, you know what it was? I just totally forgot he existed when I put together my list. I think it might have been rather late. Like, where's Vartanian? And I just went, oh, yeah. No,
you revised that one.
I think I revised that one. I think I went back and watched some of his more of his fights. Yeah, I think he was at the end of a marathon session, and I just watched one fight and was like, forget him. No, this is why we have two people watching the tape, because I feel that's easy to do. No, I'm really I went going back on the second watch, and I actually saw more of his fights. His takedown game's fantastic. He's really fun to watch fight in terms of like that clinch takedown game. And that skill set alone, I think, makes him pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, looking at I got to disagree. So I'm looking at your guys' actual scouting report on him. I think he is a pretty good striker, and he's got good fundamentals, which is not necessarily something that we always see on the Russian scene. He really gets his weight behind his shots. He keeps his feet moving under him. He's not reaching. I don't think he's outstanding in that regard, but the point that you made in your scouting report, that you guys made in your scouting report, is that his skill set is going to adapt really well to American-style judging. And that that I thought was an important point, and it's part of the reason that I like Vartanian as much as I do. I think his skill sets are a really good fit for the American metagame and what American judges look for.
Yeah, if I
can. He looks like an American-raised fighter, is really the thing. Like, much more so than a lot of the combat Sambo guys. And that's partially probably because he's more Muay Thai and, like, with touches of combat Sambo than he is just a pure combat Sambo guy. And he's got much more of the traditional sort of three-dimensional game that you'd think of in the U.S.
Yeah, I have a term that I've kind of, for our scouting report, since we're looking at so many Russians and guys with combat Sambo backgrounds, I just call it combat Sambo striking. Technically sound, fundamentally sound, but the rules of combat Sambo, you get no points for striking unless you hit a knockdown, and then it counts as a takedown. So guys just load up on single shots to try to knock a guy down with one punch or one kick, and as a result, you get a lot of guys who just kind of sling power shots and don't really bother with setup shots or kind of the strikes that soften guys up or test defenses, and I just generally refer to that now as combat Sambo striking. I think he has very combat Sambo striking, and if he starts fighting in the U.S., if he starts training with other people, he could transition that into a more complete striking game.
Don't know what to say to that. All right, so moving right along, number 5, Ryan Scope. Ryan Scope was probably. I mean, there are a few decent UK prospects out there. There's what's his name? Walter Gahadze. There's Tom Breeze. There's Danny Roberts. But Scope, I think, is by far the best of them. He's the guy that seems to actually have. Not only is he a great athlete, really fast, really fluid. Just, really flexible, amazing, which is, it's a weird skill that often isn't as important in other sports, but ends up being a decent MMA skill. And really good everywhere. I really like Ryan Scope's game a lot.
Yeah, the reason I liked him so much, because I think you and I both put him at number 5 in our original list that we compared, and the reason I liked him over the other UK prospects was he was the guy that I felt could legitimately wrestle out of the group. Good athlete, not the best athlete of the group. I think that pretty firmly belonged to Gahadze, but I feel Scope is just a notch below in terms of athlete, and I felt he was the best wrestler of the group and just tough as nails on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of good things to say about Scope. Most of which you've already covered in your scouting report, so I'll hold off. But I think he could be really good, especially if he starts spending all of his time at bigger camps. I think he could be a really, really, really good fighter. And he's really young. He's still got a ton of room for development. Another reason I like Vartanian as much as I did, because he's got a lot of room to continue getting better. Like, when you're looking at Scope, he is nowhere close to his athletic prime. Like, he's only 22. You look at Kamaru Usman, who's an awesome athlete and ridiculously strong. But this is as good physically probably as Usman's going to get. Scope can still get faster, and he can still get a lot stronger. So that's, and you marry that to the kind of technical skills that he already has and the kind of nuances in his game that he already has. And Scope could end up. Scope is, if everything goes right, Scope is a legit potential top 5 guy. Yeah. Like, probably a lightweight, not welterweight, but has that kind of potential in him.
Yeah, I would depend, I think, on whether or not he could grow into the welterweight division. Because I think he's got the level of athleticism that he could make that work without having to drain himself on the cut. Maybe not.
But. He could, but that's a tough hill to climb. Is always being the smaller guy, and because his frame really is not that big. He's generously listed at 5'10", and I think he's probably closer to 5'8" or 5'9".
Could be. That could be. That could end up being a problem. So, Hussein Kaliev. He's the little brother to Adam Kaliev, who is not appearing in the UFC anytime soon, that I can tell because of visa issues. I don't know that that's going to plague his brother, though, because he's already made the move to K-Dojo, which is in the U.S., so I can't imagine that he's having too much trouble getting over here to fight. Thoughts on Kaliev, Pat? What'd you think?
No, I mean, I think you guys already have already covered it fairly well. I mean, he's training with kind of an up and coming team at K-Dojo. They're pretty clearly those guys also have good relationships with other gyms in the New Jersey area. Get good diverse training, a lot of good training partners in there. I think he can be a really good fighter. I think you guys pretty much covered it all in your scouting report.
I'm a big fan of him because I think aside from Usman, I think he's the best wrestler on this list. He's a really fantastic wrestler. He doesn't. The biggest hole he has, and it caused us to make a Chael Sonnen comparison, is that he really seems to only have a rudimentary submission grappling game. But that's a hole that is pretty easy to close up. I think of the skill sets in MMA, that is not one that is hard to learn. As long as you put in the time, you're going to learn how to grapple on the ground and defend submissions to a certain level. And he's a good athlete, and I really like his ability to finish takedowns, and I think that kind of sets him on a level where I think he could end up being a long-time meaningful fighter at welterweight. I don't know if he's going to be a top 5 guy, but I think he could hang around in that top 15 for a significantly longer period of time than one might think, just because of his wrestling ability.
All right, and then next up, I'm going to lump these two together because, honest to God truth, we had a snafu in the middle of putting this whole list together, and we had originally had a tie for number 2 between Magomed Mustafayev and Abubakar Nurmagomedov. I can't honestly see a great deal of difference in rating or scouting one higher above the other. Pat, do you have any idea on these guys or who you think is going to go further?
Yeah, I mean, I would say for me the answer has to be Nurmagomedov just because of who his not because of who his brother is, but because of who his father is.
Yeah.
Because Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov is one of the very best judo and sambo coaches in Dagestan, which has a lot of really good judo and sambo coaches. I mean, I don't know if you've ever watched to all of our listeners / watchers out there, if you haven't seen Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov teaching MMA-specific grappling and wrestling skills, you need to, because of the way that the things that he advocates are super MMA-specific, and they're very, very, very good. I mean, you should know that. So the fact that is Abubakar Nurmagomedov's primary coach, and presumably eventually, if he makes the move to the U.S., he'll have access to whoever Khabib is working with as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, that in and of itself is enough for me to rank him ahead. I think Mustafayev is a really interesting prospect, and I think that he could do good things. I think he's very athletic. I think he's got a lot of really interesting aspects to his game that I'd like to see more of. But I think the safer bet is Nurmagomedov in terms of long-term potential.
Yeah, I believe we ended up, when we broke the tie between them, we purely gave we dropped Nurmagomedov pretty much because Mustafayev has a recent win over Nurmagomedov, and it was an accidental cut win, and it was a fantastic fight up until then. I remember Zane and I both watching this one and being like, this could legitimately be on the main card of a UFC fight night, and it would not look out of place. It was a fantastic fight. I think obviously Nurmagomedov is the better wrestler, takedown artist. Mustafayev is the better striker. Other than that, I think athletically they're pretty similar. I would expect both these guys to be in the UFC at some point and win fights. I'm not sure where either of their ceilings really lie. I think both of them have fairly high ceilings. I'm not sure where they fall, but I think they could easily both fairly safely say that they could both be mid-level welterweight fighters in a really deep division. And I would be surprised if neither of them broke out to be top 15 guys. I expect at least one of them to get on that level at some point.
Finally, Kamaruddin Usman. Any reason to think title at some point in the future?
Contend for a title, that's a high bar. But I certainly think that he is a virtual lock to be a top 15 fighter, as close as you can come to being a lock to be a top 10 fighter. He's got a good shot at being a top 5 fighter, and he's got as good a chance as any prospect that's unsigned right now of being a future title challenger. Will he win a title? That I don't know. I mean, but that's kind of stuff is really hard.
That's why I'm asking. Is there anything? That's why I say. Is there any reason not like why do you think he is going to be?
No. Is there any a priori reason not? No, God no, Like you look at Kamaru Usman's first pro fight, and he looks better in the striking phase than guys who have 10 pro fights. Like he's an incredible athlete. That's the number one thing you're looking for. He's an incredible wrestler. He has a deep reservoir of skill that he can fall back on whenever he's in trouble. You can see it in his fights. Whenever he looks like he's having problems with his striking, he's just like, oh, I can just blast double this guy or finish it, or like get in on a single and finish it with a trip, or like he has a really deep well of takedowns, all of which he finishes with authority. And that's like Coach Mike was talking about this on the Heavy Hands podcast. Like if there's one thing that translates really well from amateur wrestling to MMA, one consistent facet, it's that guys who finish their takedowns with authority, who have a variety of authoritative finishes, tend to translate really well. And Usman does that fantastically. He's got fantastic finishes.
Yeah, he's got a wicked power chain finish game. He gets in on your hips, and you're gonna hit the mat. It's really just your defense just determines how hard you're hitting the mat and in what fashion you're hitting the mat. But he's getting you down. And I started watching him with the Marcus Hicks fight, which was a pretty impressive win over a guy who hasn't been super active. And then I immediately went back and watched his first fight of his career, and just like Pat said, I was blown away how developed he looked in his first pro fight. That's not something that you see. Most guys look like raw trash in their first fight. And you'll see some athletic gifts, but you'll be missing significant parts of his game. His game was already in place on his first pro fight, and he is just polishing it and improving it pretty much every time out in the cage.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen this, like Chris Weidman's first pro fight, or Jose Aldo's first pro fight, or Johnny Hendricks' first pro fight. Those guys looked not good at anything other than the skill set that they brought in with the major skill set that they brought in with them. They looked like hot garbage at everything else. Shit, I mean, Hendricks looked like hot garbage as a striker up to like his 7th or his 8th pro fight. Yeah. Like he looked like he could do anything on the feet aside from wing a left hand. And
sorry.
Yeah, it just goes to show what kind of team Usman has behind him, and the Black Zillions have done a really awesome job of building guys' skill sets up from the very start. Like that they are building fundamentally sound prospects with deep reservoirs of skill.
Yeah, one of the things that I think what this brought up to me, and this is something that I honestly, anybody who's interested in watching prospects in MMA has to make this fight like prime watching criteria, especially because Usman is about to face the same opponent. But go watch Chris Weidman's fight with Valdir Araujo, who's like your classic regional top-tier gatekeeper kind of guy, like the guy you beat to get over into the UFC. It's Chris Weidman's last fight before hitting the UFC. Scrappy Brazilian, grapples well, decent athlete, solid everywhere, not exceptional anywhere. And watch that fight, because you're watching a guy who's about on the cusp of heading onto a fast track to the UFC title. You know, this is right before Weidman got signed, and once he got signed, he was fighting for the belt after 6 fights. I mean, his path to UFC gold was very short. Not John Jones short, but still.
Well, John Jones ruined the curve for everybody. Yeah. Even a guy like Chris Weidman, who then ruined the curve again for everyone.
But watch that fight, because Chris Weidman does not look very good. Like, it's not. He gets hit a lot. He loses position a lot. He doesn't get half the takedowns he goes for, and it's a scrap. You still see some great things that Chris Weidman does, and he wins the decision clearly. But like, people need to watch that fight and understand that's what a top tier blue chip prospect looks like early in their career.
Yeah, I mean, the Chris Weidman that showed up in that fight, honestly, that showed up to fight and beat handily Valdir Araujo, like, he was raw as shit. He was incredibly raw. And, you know, like, I can only think of one guy who looked polished in, you know, his fourth, fifth pro fight, somewhere in there, who ended up going on to be any good. It was Georges St-Pierre. He's the only one I can think of who, when he was still in the regionals, looked like a guy who knew exactly what he was doing. But other than that, you know, you're going to see even Jose Aldo's last fight before the WEC against Shoji Maruyama. Aldo was getting hit way more than we're used to seeing Aldo get hit. Like, he was shooting shitty takedowns, and he was letting guys off the hook when he had them in trouble. Like, you know, like, those things are a really important reality check for what you're looking for in a top prospect. You expect to see a guy who still has holes in his game, or whose skill sets really don't go that deep, or he doesn't have like 17,000 different things that he knows how to do from any given position.
Yeah, I mean, it's like nobody was talking realistically about Anderson Silva as one of the future greatest fighters of all time when he was in like the middle of his career. You know, when he was in Pride, they were like, wow, he's a pretty exciting striker. Wouldn't it be fun if he turned into something? And then they cut his ass because he couldn't stop getting submitted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even you go back and you look at Anderson's fight with, Jesus, I can't believe that, Maha Sakurai. Mm-hmm. Like, Anderson Silva did not look anything like the Anderson Silva who eventually became the greatest of all time. You know, like, and it's just things like that are important reminders that you know, there are a lot of things that can happen between being a blue chip prospect and being a future champion. That there's a lot of shit that has to happen in there in the middle to make that transformation happen.
Yeah. So last question I wanted to have. This is basically just for Pat, but because he's the guest of our prospect scouting report now. Not of the prospectus, you know, whatever. We're all equal here. I mean, below me, but we're all equal. But was there anybody on this list that you felt like you'd missed the first, like, any big surprises? Anybody that just jumped off and you're like, oh shit, that guy?
Off the top of my head, I would say maybe Usman, but Usman, at the point when I was looking a full year ago, like, I basically started around this time a year ago. I would say maybe Usman. That, like, maybe I should have seen that coming. But Abubakar Nurmagomedov, I looked at his tape when I was scouting, and I thought, this dude hasn't beaten anybody with a winning record, and he's still pretty raw. I still feel that way to a certain extent about Kaliev. I'm not super impressed with the guys that Kaliev has beaten, and I think he still has. But you know, that's true of a lot of the K Dojo guys in general, and most of them have turned out to be just fine.
Khabib's record coming up was terrible. Like, he fought almost exclusively cans.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But he'd beaten a lot of them. When you've beaten 15 or 18 cans and you're 21 or 22 years old, like Khabib was, then that's one thing. When you've beaten 6 or 7 cans, like, that's you know.
I'm just saying, like,
we're getting into I mean, we're getting into imprecise territory here. But really, I would say Usman and probably Usman is the big one, just because of the fact that he comes from the Black Zillions, and, you know, if you come up at a big camp, you are almost a mortal walk. Like, you can count on one hand the number of guys who come up at a big camp and beat good competition who don't turn out to be something really at least good.
Yeah.
You know, it's like Joey Gambino, and like two other dudes.
Yeah.
Oh God.
All right, so now we want to get on because it's a Halloween. We need to have a Halloween special. We need to be like, it's got to be a spooky show at some point. None of us dressed up. We want to talk
We were
scary.
counting on you, Pat. We were counting on you.
Yeah, we
Shit, I'm-
want to talk. We want to talk our favorite fearsome fighters at this point, and I really realize that Mondragon dos Santos shouldn't probably count just because having hepatitis, while that makes you rather scary.
Having that.
Or alternatively, Alex Emelianenko.
Alexander
Like-
Emelianenko, I will argue, was scary long before he had hepatitis.
That is not a line that I ever thought I would hear anybody say.
But yeah, we should talk about the spookiest MMA fighters. Is it Creepy Joe Lozon or should we be delving deeper?
Oh,
What are your thoughts, Tom?
well, if we're talking spooky, I'm a little unprepared. If we're just talking flat out frightening, like terrifying, I'm probably gonna go like not current fighters.
That's fine.
I'm probably gonna go back to like the two guys that if I was like across the cage from, I would literally shit my pants. Would probably either be like 1990s Ralph Gracie, or like early 2000s Wanderlei Silva, who I get the distinct impression that he's clearly in some sort of chemical-induced berserker rage, and if the referee was not there, would literally beat me to death without someone there to pull him off me.
I mean, when we're talking about late '90s, early 2000s Vanderlei, we're talking about a dude who not that far into the past had a massive gaping cut and was using that to headbutt a dude.
Yeah.
Before the fight was stopped. That's the guy we're talking about there. Now, for me, scary guy has to be Lee Murray. I think Lee Murray is one of the most terrifying dudes in the history of MMA. He's like, there's a great quote from Dana White where he said, Lee Murray is a scary son of a bitch, and I don't mean in the cage. And he's like, and Dana White went on to say, he's one of the few dudes I've ever dealt with where I was just legit scared because he was fucking crazy and you didn't know what he was gonna do. So I mean, not so much inside the cage, though he was a very good fighter, obviously, but outside it, Lee Murray was a terrifying sumbitch.
He's the kind of guy that would, kidnap children to hold them hostage to break into a bank.
Yeah. Get stabbed at a glamour model's birthday party and have to be revived 4 times with the defibrillators at the hospital. How do you I want to know, what do you get into a fight at a glamour model's birthday party about? How does that go down?
What don't you fight about at a glamour model's birthday party?
Fair counterpoint, Tom. Fair counterpoint.
Clearly, Pat's never been.
Now all of this is driven all thoughts that I had, all functional thoughts from my head. But honestly, I mean, one of the scariest guys in MMA has got to be Melvin Manhoef at this point. I mean, and not from this raw fear perspective, but how many fighters have you seen where guys are so functionally scared of getting hit even once? Just fundamentally, how terrified was Doug Marshall of getting hit one time?
Yeah. I mean, you could say the same thing about old school Shane Carwin too.
Yeah, Shane Carwin would be another dude.
Or
there've been a few, and it's guys like Shane Carwin, Melvin Manhoef, where the fear isn't so much oh, he's such a monster that he's gonna brutalize me in some new and heretofore unfounded way, but it's just that idea of if he touches me and I'm standing up, I will be knocked out.
Yeah. I think another one you could probably add on that list is nightmare scenarios being started in the clinch with Brock Lesnar, where I think Frank Mir, who is a massive man, said that being underneath Brock Lesnar felt like drowning, and I think anyone who's grappled can appreciate that feeling. And when someone makes you feel like that, when you're like a black belt at like Frank Mir's level, that's the guy that you like actively avoid in the gym. We're just like the professionals, like, do you want to roll with that guy? Like, no, I do not.
Otherwise, I got to say, one of the most fun things I remember of like a fearsomeness that is now so totally unfounded that it's hard to believe it ever existed was watching Bob Sapp kickbox early in his career. No. Like when he was coming up, like when he had just like gotten out of the NFL and was starting his like roid-induced kickboxing career and was fighting like 150-pound Japanese men in like K1. Like he was just it was basically like watching a totally untalented Wanderlei Silva. Wanderlei Silva without any functional strength or ability.
But not just in K1, in MMA too. Old school Bob was terrifying. Like the idea that somebody that big could move that fast was terrifying. Like that, it's like, oh, that's what happens when you take somebody and you put them through the American athletic system and strength and conditioning. You throw on a whole pile of steroids, and like, oh, you just end up with this unbelievable, ridiculous athlete.
Yeah, he was an absolute monster, and he wasn't a great fighter at any point. But he was a total and unbelievable monster of a man at like the height of his ability.
I mean, could you imagine having Bob Sapp on top of you hitting you, or having Bob Sapp grabbing onto your gi, because that was a thing that they did in Pride, and just grabbing onto that and punching you in the face repeatedly in the clinch? Do you imagine like what that would feel like? That's
no. No, I can't.
I don't want to know what that feels like.
I'm disappointed that the camera switched off of Pat there, because we had another GIF there with his little mind explosion. There we go.
That's the one.
Yeah, just like. Yeah. But yeah, no. So have we covered terrifying fighters?
I think other than like we talked about dirty fighters last time, and so there's a whole Gilbert Yvel thing, and we could pull out the Don Fry at the height of his sort of
needs to be mentioned. Needs to be mentioned if we're talking terrifying fighter. Rousimar Palhares.
Oh yes.
If you value your knees, you like guys legitimately ducking fights with him because they value their ability to walk.
Which is totally fair. That seems fair to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Palhares is basically Melvin Manhoff of knee bars.
That is true.
Awkward silence.
Yeah. Anyway, I think we've got a bunch of stuff to cover next time, but we've already hit our hour and probably a little more than that. So, thanks for joining me for this. Thanks for going over the top 10 welterweight prospects list. Obviously, in another month, we'll have to focus on the light heavyweight prospect list, I expect. And next time out, I believe our topics are going to be why guys, developmental declines and plateaus, why guys plateau early, why they start falling off, and maybe a look at when and why guys should start considering moving up in weight. I believe those are going to be the next topics we cover. So people who enjoyed this show, join us for the next show. We've already got a bunch of stuff to talk about, and we'll probably come up with something else completely absurd in the meantime. Otherwise, if you like the show, remember to thumbs up, like it on Facebook. That's important. That's like worth money and stuff. I mean, it may not seem like it, but that's actually like a fundamentally important thing or like it on YouTube rather. That's a fundamentally important thing to how YouTube works. And subscribe to MMANation.com. Follow Pat at SureDog.com. Follow Tom and I at Bloody Elbow. And join us next time. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks. Still live.
Still live.